Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org. And with me, I have my very special guest, Nathan Kutz, former Message believer. Nathan, it was such an exciting story last week, and we got up to the point where you had just lost a very close friend, and we're running a little bit over on time, so I thought we'd bump it over to this week and tell the rest of the story, but I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more, so I'm just going to let you run with it.
Yeah, John. They probably were because we were sort of at a good stopping point, and it was. I mean, looking back on it, I guess that was a pretty good cliffhanger for people. So, and just so everyone knows that that's all. This is literally all just me talking. I don't know that we really have a certain per se format here. This is literally, or not really. I don't even have a clipboard of, an outline here. I actually thought about that, but my wife was like, no, you're not preaching. You need to just talk. It's a conversation. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's one of those times where, I know, babe, you're right.
I don't do formal interviews. I'm a very, you can see how I'm dressed. I'm a very informal person. So this is me. Yeah. What you see is what you get.
Yeah, with the exception of this shirt, I mean, I'm pretty much. I mean, it's t-shirt and pants just all the time. Well, not always pants if it's warm enough. Shorts also, John.
Oh my gosh! Now you're dressing like the prophet in Africa. You can't do that.
I had to throw that in there. Just no pun intended, everybody. So I think we had left off with my roommate at the time committing suicide, and where that had left me and my feelings, and that was one of the catalysts that made me really start questioning everything. I think where I'll pick up with is where I said something like, these are people, and about the only reason why message, teaching, doctrine, all those things, the only reason why it seems like it works is that it's all done in a controlled environment bubble. And there was something I said with once everyone turns off the music, and what I kind of specifically meant by that is if you notice with all of these, well, and maybe not even necessarily charismatic churches now, a lot of modern churches, they've adopted the whole, well, not everyone, but I mean, it's kind of surprising even in our own area. There's a few that I haven't sat in a church service, but where they apparently, it's like they've sort of got it's like a miniature Christian band concert or something. And that's the thing. And while, obviously we can sing and, have music and all of that, that's not what I'm saying. What I mean is when you're in a Pentecostal or charismatic type church service, the music all has like a structure to it, and it's really a mark of man-centered worship, man-centered or human-centered worship and theology. Even that's an offshoot of human-centered theology, and it's all about manipulation. And I know people's going to hear that and they're going to be like, well, I'm a message believer and now you're misconstruing me. We don't try to sit around manipulating people. And that's not like, if you're that person listening to this, please hear me out. In the 1800s, when the Second Great Awakening came about, music really started being heavily used in the initiation of, like I said in the previous episode about, really just getting a response and manipulating you. It's the same exact reason. I've often said this: we're practically throwing ammunition at to agnostics, atheists, and skeptics to shoot right back at us if we do that. Because I've listened to one, I can't remember his name per se. He was actually a former evangelical minister and everything, and he became an atheist. And he said that he could actually still do the whole thing of speaking in tongues if he really tried. And so, and also I've heard other atheists. I think it was actually Matt Dillahunty. He said that he went to rock and roll concerts and would feel the same exact, emotion, the emotional effect, as he did when he was a Christian in church with the whole musical effect. So, yeah, now I know Satan can duplicate some things and all of that. He can't create, but, he has his own bag of tricks. But at the same time, it's just like Moses and Pharaoh's magicians. Just because they can duplicate certain things, it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that they're on the level.
Yeah.
And if you're initiating a response like that, then you're really. You're not. It's just not the way that God has ordained, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny when you word it like that. After knowing the history, when I was in this thing, I would have said exactly what you said. They're out there, the rock and roll music, you go to a concert, you feel the emotion. In fact, William Branham said that about the Beatles. He said they were faith healing in the Beatles. But what's really, really funny is if you actually know the history, it is not that those groups are imitating through the acts of Satan. It's literally that the revivalists were imitating the entertainment industry. And by doing so, there's this conundrum, right? Because they're doing the same kind of emotional hype and advertising and the whole bit. Yeah. It's a stage act, and these guys were religious stage acts. And they were duplicating this to the extent, I wish I'd have saved them all, but I came across several different newspaper articles where they would set up this tent, just like you would have in those days, the circuses. They would set up this big circus tent, advertise the Revivalist in the newspapers, billboards, coffee. Well, I don't know about coffee shops, but in your general stores. And right. Everybody in their family, even if they weren't even religious people, they would come because that's an event that you can have some entertainment. And they would sell hot dogs on the ground. And there'd be hot dog stands right as you're walking into the tent to hear the religious entertainer. And they're mimicking the entertainment industry. And then that spawned off, all of the music you're talking about. As you can see, I'm a musician. So I took this big deep dive on theology of music. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, what in the world were we thinking? We did not even believe the theology in our own music. There's not a single Christian out there that believes that they're going to spend eternity sitting on a cloud playing a harp. but that's some of the songs, man. And in the cult, it was levels worse. We had songs like The Cabin's Location. Tell me that's a song about Jesus. The Cabin's Location, about this human prophet guy. Right. And the one recently was Drinking the Tape Water. There's no words, man. It's unbelievable what we did.
Tape water, golly. It's all really, really crazy when you think about it. And looking back on those time frames of life, like I said in the first episode, a lot of pleasant memories, but then at the same time, certain things, it's just look back and it's like, man, how did I believe that? But yeah, I mean, I started noticing the effect of, different, atheists and agnostics. Like I mentioned in the first episode, how I had a friend that was an atheist, and I just didn't have anything that would really top his arguments. And of course, like I said, that was a mark of, not, I just didn't have the grounding that I needed in Christ. Because I really believe that once you have that, the Holy Spirit really does begin to work and flow and start building that in you. But I started noticing all these things. I was just really questioning, like, man, like this just doesn't seem like this actually works. And, then I started really, whatever critical thinking that I had done before that, I mean, that was just not even, I don't even know if I would look back on that and say that was even critical thinking. I guess it was like a little preschool primer on it. And I just started looking at everything, and it's just like, man, this, what are we doing here? Like, what am I doing here? And, clearly something's not right when someone is in that kind of dire strait and they are reaching out for help, and they don't get help. Like, there, and then I started looking at myself and thinking, there's all these claims that, the message is this, the message is that, and do I see that in my own life? Like, I started seeing the faults of the whole, like name it and claim it type of thing. And I was just like, that this junk doesn't work. This is, I thought this is all getting quite ridiculous the more that I think about this. And it's just one thing after another. And I was like, man, like I can't even really begin to justify this much anymore. And actually at that time frame, and it really, looking back on my life and, believing that God's in control of everything, and from a common sense life perspective, prominent, I listened to the book from Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life, and I really gained a lot of benefit from that actually at that time. I started listening to his material, and and I liked his perspective on religion. And then, of course, I had also listened to others, other agnostics, atheists, and things like that. And while I didn't say, there's no God per se, like I mentioned that in the first one, I never went that far. But I thought to myself, I was like, they have a lot of good points. And today, I mean, I still say, especially in their criticisms of religion, atheists and agnostics are right about a lot of things.
It's funny because in the message, well, in any of these fundamentalist type religions, they want to corral you so that you can't hear any critical thought, any critical information. And they will tell you, don't listen to the atheist, don't listen to the agnostic, because everything they say is going to be false, or they're going to be trying to mislead you. I was, like you, I was extremely shocked. The first time I talked to, I think it was an agnostic person. They had just been burned by religion, did not want anything to do with it. But the things they told me fully contradicted my own theology, and I go look them up in the Bible, and sure enough, what they said was absolutely correct. And I realized that if you're in that mindset, I don't care if it's mainstream religion. If you're in a Baptist church and they tell you, don't go listen to this critical thought, it's no different than a cult. And one of my favorite textbooks, it's called The Text of the New Testament, Its Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration. This is one of the best textbooks on the New Testament. It's written by a Christian theologian, Bruce Metzger, but he partnered with the world's leading agnostic, Bart Ehrman. And I have to tell you, this textbook is phenomenal. It will it'll take what you know about the Bible and flip it upside down. And then you go back and you read it and you're like, no, wait a minute. Half of what I had was tradition and not actual history. And anyway, I can't recommend this book enough, but it just goes to show that there are people out there who are Christians, who are theologians, who realize that truth is truth. It doesn't matter where the truth comes from. And there's the Bible phrase, iron sharpens iron. If somebody has truth and you have truth, well, partner with the agnostic, man, because your good theology may rub off on the agnostic. Now, I don't think it has with
Christ.
Exactly. Now, I don't think Bart Ehrman has gone that direction, but
no.
I still, to this day, I will listen to some of his debates because, man, some of the things that he rips up the the opposition, I go look it up, and sure enough, I don't agree with everything he says, but there's a lot he says that I didn't know, and why in the world were they hiding this from me?
Yeah. I'll say, even though I vastly disagree with him, obviously, and I'm on, I guess you'd say I'm on a totally different side than him, but I would say one of the greatest debaters and even just the way that he would speak and use language was Christopher Hitchens. And now, obviously, not to go down that trail, but he was a very stark atheist, but he was highly intelligent.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've even thought about going back and listening to a few of the things that he said again, because while he's approaching Scripture from, too much of a rationalistic mind, and you do that too much and it can be a mockery of God. At the same time, though, when he looks at Scripture, but then he looks at the Christian, it's kind of like what someone said about Gandhi, that he loved, he said, I love your Christ, I don't like your Christians.
Yeah.
And so it's that same concept. And so, and I was listening to them, and I was just like, man, I think that there is a God, but I was like, I'm just kind of done. Like I can't really say I'm a Christian. I can't say, and that's the thing. And looking back on it, I'm actually very thankful for that time of life when I started coming to those conclusions, because I can really truly say, and I'm not trying to take the words of Jesus out of context, but it was almost as if God's plan in my life was literally in action. It was like the axe was being laid to the root of my trees. And anything that was not right to start with was being chopped down. And, that and the grace of God in that time frame was just absolutely astounding. And so I started coming to those conclusions, and there was a sermon, and I'm not going to mention any names, but I was in that Fifth Message Church, and there was a sermon, and some things that were being said was related to, and maybe I took certain things out of context, but the whole point of it, I didn't. The children from my first marriage, they were there in church with me, and there were some things being said, and I knew that they didn't necessarily, if it was who I thought it was, if it was what I thought it meant, I did not want them to know the same thing, even if they didn't really know who it was about. Does that make sense? I know some people who weren't in the message are going to hear this, but in the message, here are some of the downfalls. I've really learned what real preaching is. And for one thing that it isn't, it is not singling people out from the pulpit. in certain message churches, man, that was terrible. That was absolutely horrendous.
Let me guess, you're supposed to preach by quoting every single statement, by prefacing it with, "and the prophet said."
Yeah, of course, right? Yeah, I mean, it's literally just a rehashing of, something that's 60 years old. That's not given by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, no less. And so that's the thing, it was the preacher was addressing a certain situation. And if my children were able to pick up on what they were talking about, even if they didn't necessarily know who, the who at the time was kind of important because I knew the people and they weren't in church, and it actually didn't have anything to do with doubting the message. It was a entirely different situation. But I knew the people, and no one's perfect. But I thought to myself, I was like, now, that's not fair. And that's really, if that's what this is about, number one, if it is, I know I'm not the only one that can see that. Number two, my kids know them actually quite closely.
Yeah.
And this is not a fair representation. And I thought to myself, it was just like and I was like, no. I thought, no. Because number one, at the time, I only get my kids, on the weekends anyway now. Yeah, because the divorce had happened and all that. It's like, like seriously? And I'm going to come and spend the only time that I have with them. I'm trying to bring them to church, still trying to do the right thing, have some moral structure, And I thought, and then I thought to myself, like, I wanted to. I actually did want to be here tonight, and this is what I came to hear. And then it was like, these are my kids, these are my children. I want them to learn about God. What's this? You can address situations in a biblical way that's not like that.
Even in normal society, like if you have a problem with a person in your workplace, for example, you don't stand up on a table where the entire room can hear, "I've got a problem with you, that person."
Yep.
What's it going to do to that person? They're going to hate your guts for the whole rest of the time you work there. And they're not going to be persuaded to change because you just embarrass the heck out of them. You don't do this in the real world. Why would you do it in a church?
Exactly. Exactly right. And, and I thought to myself, because at that point too, through the book I had listened to and the other things, and it kind of learning to think logically and rationally about life and things, and of course there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. Logic is related to the word logos, and so it does come from God. Yes, Satan's tried to corrupt it, but it is of God. So there's nothing wrong with thinking logically. And so the more that I thought about it, it's like, I thought I can't do this. And at that point I was starting to realize, why am I the way I am in some ways?
Yeah.
And the effect of sitting under preaching like that, especially when I was really young, 3 times a week. And even up till I was 18, 3 times a week. The Fifth Message church that I was at, they actually just had service on the weekends. They didn't have a midweek service. And, and even still, because that's the thing, and I'm not throwing a stone at any one person. It just comes with the package. When when a preacher, and I mean, I'm trying to say this with grace. I mean, just complete benefit of the doubt. Because they would say, well, we don't have a theologian, we don't have we don't have anything like that. Yeah, but you still, when you're going constantly over and over and over through 1,100 sermons by one man, then
he's your theologian.
Right, yeah, I mean, you could almost, I know it's not technically that, but if I was to point to something in the message that could be something like, I don't know, a creed or a confession or a systematic theology, it would probably be something like the collection of, I don't know, didn't they have something like a seed library or...
Yeah, they had a few different things. In the end, what it turns out to be is that they talk in circles. It's double speak. Because on the one hand, they'll tell you, don't trust science. Science is out to disprove us and trick us. But then they reference the sciences, the scientists, in every single example that they use of what they claim to be supernatural. I heard this, and I wish I could remember his name, but I heard this person, and I'll get the quote wrong, but he said something to the effect of, if science disproves God, then your understanding of science is incorrect, your understanding of God is incorrect, or both are incorrect. In other words, you can't take the leap of faith that science is fully incorrect, because there's a scientific method, and it starts with a theory. As a theory, I want to prove that this book is made of paper. I don't know that it is, but I want to prove it. Well, then I can go do the analysis, I can study, and the scientific method won't come to the conclusion. It will say, based on these facts that we know, we can say with a certain percentage of certainty that, yes, this book is made of paper. That's the scientific method. And something may come down the line later that says, no, it's actually made of bits of plastic and paper or whatever. I don't know. But that's the scientific method. In these cults, they try to tell you that any analysis, any logic, anything, literally anything that you can use to apply critical thought against the message, that's of the devil.
Oh, of course it is. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's all bad. And don't get me wrong, I do think, I'm even now careful with like any sort of resources about counseling or psychology or whatever like that, because I think it is important for people to remember that if you're a Christian, you have to be wary of the fact that, people like Freud, as intelligent and, as smart as they were, many of them weren't Christians. Carl Jung, I don't know if he necessarily claimed to be a Christian. He wasn't an atheist, but people do have to be aware of that. At the same time, though, many of it's literally just observing. I can't remember the term for it. A clinical. I don't know. It's a science of observation and therefore determining the psychology of people.
Right.
There's a term, but it's on the tip of my tongue. But
yeah,
they do come to a lot of truthful conclusions. And it's literally, there's nothing inherently bad about it. It's just watching us.
Yeah.
We all actually do it ourselves anyway. It's just we don't have the title psychologist.
Yeah.
But through that, I became agnostic, and I just reached that point where, okay, this is it. I thought it took me a bit to really come to grips with it because I knew what it meant. I knew there's no going back this time. There's no, oh, hey, I've been, and like I say, I have been helped in that period in 2016 by the pastor I had at the time tremendously. But, we're talking 2 years later, and I thought to myself, I was like, okay, where I'm at, I can't remain truthful to myself, to my children, to anyone, and stay here. And I thought, okay, well, if I leave this time, like this really is it. And this time, I sort of had that structure to, I had more understanding, and I was just like, all right, let it rip. I'm not going back. That's it. And I actually wrote a 4-page letter, I think, and mailed it to the pastor. I didn't want to do it over the phone just because, it's just not. I didn't want there to be any kind of bad relation at all. I made a couple mistakes the very first time that I left, to be completely fair and honest, and should have handled a couple things better. And I didn't want to repeat that, and I knew that talking on the phone could repeat that. And so, it was just, to be honest, it was one of those things where completely right intentions, but I didn't have the right attitude about it. And this time around, it's just like, nah, I'm just going to write a letter and let it be that. And then too, I thought, that's kind of more personal anyway. And I wanted to make sure that I conveyed it was nothing against anyone per se in particular, that I appreciated them and what they had done for me in my life and all of that. But I was just, my thoughts and convictions are no longer in line with message teaching. And I have to do what I have to do. And I have to be honest with that. Yeah. And so, and I feel like that really was kind of the better way to go about it, because that's the thing. If I had just said, I don't know, maybe I could have been more careful and crafted it in such a way to where it was, nicely said. I don't even know if you can say it in a nice way, because people are not going to take it nicely. I don't believe this guy anymore. I don't think he was a prophet. I don't, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it wouldn't have been good. So that's how I did it. And that was November, at that point, it was October of 2018. And, and I didn't look back. I don't know if it was at that point or not. I think I did go back and go over Believe the Signs website. I may have actually. Did you still have Seeking the Truth at that time? Or Seek Ye the Truth?
I don't think I did. I think the cult brought the YouTube site down. People don't know this, actually. I had a walking away strategy. I was going to walk away from all of this, and I'd been producing these docuseries, and I'd made it all the way up to, I think it was the point in which I introduced Jim Jones, the connection between Branham and Jim Jones. The cult attacked the YouTube site, brought it all down, and I had, I want to say it was like 2015. I was rebranding everything to just put it out there. Here's a beacon of truth if you want it, and I was going to walk away. So I want to say it was like 2015. I did this, yeah. But what you're talking about, that's really the crux of it, because in a destructive cult, the cult leader's identity gets embedded in your own identity, so it becomes as one. Yeah. And anything that you say critical to or negative to the cult leader and his authority on doctrine or scripture, because it's intertwined in your own identity, you see it as a personal attack when you're under that mind control. Yeah. So, but then on the flip side, when you leave it, you've got this and you've got to rip it out. And it's, I don't know if you've seen the sci-fi movies where there's like a symbiotic host and they've got to pull the alien out of the body. It's painful and it's messy and it's really, it's like that in your head, man. And you go through a process.
It's like separating your psyche or something like that. It's pretty crazy.
It really is. And, unless you've gone through it, I can't even describe what it feels like. It is painful. It is one of the most painful things. And you go through all of the stages of grief because that identity has died in you. But what you've described is you're going through the stage of deconstruction. And the point I wanted to lead up to is this. There's a lot of people. You have to go through a deconstruction. I don't care if you do it when you leave. I don't care if you do it 20 years later, 40 years later. You might be, I've talked to somebody who was literally in their late 70s who was going through the deconstruction of the message. He'd been away from it all those years, but it's stuck in your head, man. You have to go through that, and people mistake it for becoming an atheist or an agnostic, because to deconstruct, you have to take out everything you've learned. You have to rip it out. You have to evaluate it. And what you realize is, as you're ripping it out, well, he said this about the Bible, that's false. Throw it out. This was false. Well, in the end, you're left with, there's so many lies that they told me about the Bible. I've ripped them all out. And was the Bible itself true? Well, then you have to also deconstruct all of that platform. And when you do, you're left with nothing. You are essentially an agnostic or an atheist. And then...
Yeah, even if you're not trying to be,
Yeah. Well, then people make the mistake of claiming that as their new identity, and they'll go down the pathway. I did this. You go through the pathway if you're listening to all these guys. You mentioned Hitchens. I probably listened to all of them, man, because the hitch slaps were my favorite.
Yeah, hitch slaps, I have to say, I mean, you talk about mic drop moments. There was one. He was debating, I think, I don't know if it was in America or not. It could have been over in Europe, but he was debating an African Roman Catholic bishop. And I mean, it was like, what bam. I mean, it was like Indiana Jones with a whip with his mouth. I mean, it's like, golly, ouch. Like, you knew that he was right, but you almost felt bad for the other person, because it's like, it's the equivalent of having your clothes just ripped right off of you. Like, I mean, it's like, gosh, and he's right.
Yeah, and that's really the crux of it, right? The things that he is saying, there are a lot of Christians in the world globally. I don't care what denomination. They have become so, just like we did in the message cult, they've become so solidified in the tradition that they don't think about the tradition. And it opens the door for somebody who has critical thought to say, no, that's not right. And you go, as you're deconstructing, if you come across this and you suddenly realize, wait a minute, what he said is actually correct. What do I do with this? Well, then you go down that pathway, right? That's why I think I've mentioned, I don't know if it was in the last episode with you or one of the others, but when somebody is in the process of deconstructing, I step out of the way. I will give them, if they want to hear Hitchens, I'll send them, here's my favorite hitch slap. If they want to hear, theologian, I usually reference this book. I'll say, read this book. This is a good book about the New Testament written by both sides, and you get kind of a balance. But I let them reconstruct, because if I step in the way, I'm no better than the cult leader who's manipulating them, because as they're reconstructing their identity, the influence that you put on them can sway their rebuilding of that identity, and it's very, very wrong to do that.
Oh, it certainly is, and that, and I wanna say this, because I feel like on one hand there's going to be a message person that watches or listens to this. I don't know, may even know me personally somehow, or from way back when know me. And they're like, oh yeah, but you still became an agnostic. Like, like that's terrible. Yeah, but look at where it's the whole thing of, well, yeah, but you left and you fell off the wagon. Well, number one, you haven't heard the rest of the story yet. Number two, number one, it's okay to fall off the wagon. Did you know that? And I say this to you, message believer, and even to some of us who've been Christians for a while. Did you know that it's okay if you mess up?
Yeah.
Like did you know that the apostle Peter, who literally saw Moses and Elijah with Jesus when he was transfigured, like all these incredible things, and would walk past people and his shadow would heal them. Did you know that he almost made an extremely critical error and almost went into complete heresy himself? And
Yeah.
Paul had to fix him straight. Paul says to his face, like, it's okay to mess up. It's all right. It's no different than stubbing your toe. It's okay to, in your Christian life, to slam the door on your hand. Like,
Yeah.
it's all right. It's okay if I pour, I love Diet Pepsi and Diet Coke, and if I pour a Diet Pepsi and I spill some of it, it's all right.
Yeah. Back to the songs. There were some songs that did have some good theology. And one of my favorites, I can't remember the title of it, but started out, "We Have a Heavenly Father." And the theme was, there's a Heavenly Father who loves you and you're his child. It was a great song. Haven't heard it in years, so I'm drawing a blank on it, but take that theme. So I have children. I'm a father. I have a son. Say that one of my sons were to suddenly disown me and say, I'm no longer part of you. I don't want to be part of you. In other words, I have now become an agnostic to the Collins family. I'm an atheist to the Collins family. Do you think me as a father am going to let this happen? I'm going to go after him. I'm going to try my darndest to convince him that I have a lot of faults. I admit it, but I want to be your father. I want to love you. I want this relationship.
Right.
They sing these songs about this father that loves you, but the moment you question that father, the moment, like my son, the moment he questions his Collins nature, if this were to happen, this has not happened,
Right.
You cut him off in these type of groups. And I'll be honest, that's not a problem that's limited to the message. We've tried several different churches after leaving. One we ended up is not like this, but I want to say two of the ones that we tried, they were that way. To the extent, I think the last sermon, the one that made me walk out of one church, was they were ridiculing the atheists and agnostics. And it struck home with me heavily because I was at a point in my life, even though I was still attending church, I was deconstructing, and I was wrestling with all of this. And here he is ridiculing these guys. Well, at this point, I know some atheists, and they're really good people. So
Right.
I could not take it, and so I sympathize with you in a different way because I did this not in a message church, but I did this in a regular church. And if you are if you're a preacher who's never dealt with any of this mind control stuff, I'm just going to be honest with you. Ridiculing the people who criticize you is not the Christian way.
No, it's not. I mean, there's a I believe there's a biblical mandate for setting something straight. I believe there's a biblical mandate, for being separate from what is wrong. But it's just what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. If he never said the last part, then anyone who does some things like that could find some sort of a verse to justify them. But it's like we conveniently forget the last part of what he says. And he's like, no, like you pray for them and you try to bring them back in. Like, it's not like you open the door of the car and just, whoop, you're out. Grab them by their hair and drop them. Like, it's like it's a thing of, this isn't acceptable, and you have to understand this. This is, we honor God here, and you do it in such a way to where you almost, in a kind love, that's the whole part of it, is the love of Christ.
Yeah.
It's looking at the way Jesus did things. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that's one of the massive things that really led to where I am now. is seeing the way that Christ would handle. It's back around somewhere in the summertime at a local park where we live. There's like a little bandstand, and they'll have different genres of music play sometimes. And there was actually I guess a preacher or pastor that has like a Christian band, and he was singing a song about how that Jesus still washed the feet of Judas, even though he knew the entire time. And it still, man, that really struck me. And I was just like, man, I don't know if I could do that. And that's how we handle even those maybe they've even made themselves bitter enemies of us. But that's, as Christians, that's how we're supposed to be. And the way that is done in the message, I can remember looking back. And now I would say this was a fault of some of the ones. I can't necessarily say that I saw every single message pastor that I knew do it. But I did see one time when I was in church as a child where someone was taken out from under the protection or whatever. I remember that. I heard of another instance at a church. It wasn't an identical situation. But even then, I was uncomfortable with how that was done, even though I didn't really even understand things. But I just thought to myself, I was like, man, that's really sad. Like, it just didn't seem right. And but yeah, it's incredibly, incredibly hurtful to people. That is definitely, I would say, when you're not doing something the way Jesus and the apostles described to do it, you're literally like those prophets and the false prophets that Ezekiel, I think, and Isaiah writes about. Jeremiah, I know, writes about them. How they lead the people astray. That they're really abusing the people, and false priests and things like that.
Well, it goes back to something we talked about in the previous episode. There is no scriptural basis for the word minister. The words used in the Bible, they're the shepherds of the flock, but more than that, they're your servant. They're the one who's teaching you more about God. There is no biblical precedence for a minister to use an incantation or a curse over a body of Christians. And what it essentially does is it is lifting them in power to convince every one of their people in the congregation that they have this unnatural spiritual authority to doom you to hell.
Exactly.
And they're not an apostle. I think that's the biggest key. They are not an apostle to make this decision. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, man, don't get me started on that. You are not an apostle, and no one else is today, matter of fact. Anyway.
The apostle, in the message, the apostle was really your sorcerer, if you really think about it.
You literally just blew my mind. Talk about a morphing and twisting of it. My goodness. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair statement. In certain situations, it certainly becomes that way. So that was my time sort of as an agnostic. Now, an agnostic and atheist could listen to this and say, well, you weren't one for long enough. But, and then maybe another Christian could say, well, maybe you thought you embraced it, but God just had another plan and you weren't technically one to start with. I don't know. It's the floor's open to anybody on that. But I was agnostic. I was claiming to be agnostic, and I met my wife, and well, now my second wife, but I met her then. This would have been the end of January, beginning of February 2019. Our first date was February 1st. And so at the time that we're recording this, John, I mean, we're coming up on a pretty happy time of year. So, um, I met her, and it was really, really interesting because, we've both grown a lot in the Lord together, but she grew up United Methodist, from a baby on up, 40 years at her, at the church she grew up grew up in, excuse me. And, she's just a very incredible person. And, she's also been an educator for 20 years, was a elementary school teacher for 17. And so very intelligent. And she was like the first person that heard some of the things that I said and heard some of my arguments that I had developed and even borrowed from, all the experts in that time of agnosticism and atheism. And she was one of the first people, it really just kind of shocked me, that heard what I said and, yeah, but I get that, but have you ever looked at it like this? And I was like, okay, I don't have anything to say to that. And incidentally, I can actually say, and believe it or not, he was a Baptist. And, I know I had said before I lost the craving for alcohol and all of that. At this time, I would have, I would literally go and just enjoy like one glass of like a craft beer at a local brewery or something. And I mean, that was it. I didn't drink heavily whatsoever. I wouldn't even say habitually at that time. And I was doing okay with it. And I actually had a beer with a missionary. I never ever thought I would say that in my life. And we were just kind of talking, and I was just really blown away. He was a missionary. I was like, okay, what in the world are you doing in here? And so we started talking, and it was really, really cool. And he had been, he went to the Middle East a lot, and really was a really remarkable guy. I haven't seen him since. I really totally wish him well wherever he is. And it was kind of the same thing. And he told me, he said, I think you've seen too much of the sharp as a two-edged sword side of Christianity and not enough of the healing of Christianity. And he said, he said, and honestly, he said, I can't necessarily say that I disagree with anything that you've said today. He said, but maybe just when you're ready, he said, maybe just give it one more try. Maybe just take your time. Just look at it one more time.
Yeah.
And I thought, this guy's really on the level. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that sometime. And literally, to sort of fast forward a little bit more, later that year, that would have been February of 2019, and I would have really consciously made a decision to profess Christ as Lord and Savior. December of 2019, I joined my wife's church, United Methodist Church, and I don't know that I can fully express how incredible that life became from there forward. And I want to say this quickly. Maybe you're doubting the message, or you left the message, and maybe something bad happened in life, and you're like, oh, it's because I left. They were right, and now I'm cursed, or now I'm this. No, they're not. They were wrong.
Yeah.
number one, even meeting my wife, I've told her this so many times. I never lived life until I met her. Number one. Number two, I really didn't live life until I was actually born again. And I'll go into this further. I think we're going to do a part 3, Charles. Charles. I don't know why I said Charles. John. Oh my gosh.
Charles is much better looking than I am.
I think we've talked about doing a part 3, but I have to say I'm going to go into that more into part 3. But I just I didn't feel dirty anymore.
Yeah.
I felt it's like the Lord was looking at me and was just like, it's okay, it's all right. And I ended up writing a poem. And for the life of me now, my wife tried to help my organizational skills, much to her travail. But I'm getting better, but I can't even find the poem that I wrote. But I remember writing a poem, and it was called "The Hammer in My Hand," and it was just this. It was so I had basically lived all my life holding this hammer, and everything I did I was building with this hammer, and one day I looked, and the board that I was driving a nail into, I noticed that there was something under the nail, and then as I looked deeper I saw a hand. And then I started looking, and then I started realizing I've never quite seen this before. And then I started looking and looking, and it's as if it was as if I started to begin to see there was a man on this board, and then I looked and pulled back the curtain even more, and it was it was like I didn't literally see Jesus on a cross, but I think people get what I'm saying. Like I started realizing, this. What? What the heck's going on here?
Yeah.
And I noticed that it's Christ on the cross, and I looked and he had a smile. And the line that I can definitely remember was I asked him why he was happy or smiling, and he said, "I tell you now, the job is done." Or no, and he said, "The job is done, for I tell you now, I am God's son." And I said, "But I just nailed you to the cross with my heart covered in a layer of frost." And he said, um, and it was just like he said, "Now you know what to do with your hammer." It said, "Instead of building a kingdom of dirt and death, now you can help bring my kingdom of peace and rest." And there's just, I've never been in the military. I've never, nothing like that. But I guess just with what I, went through, turmoil, divorce, and and issues with my kids, any of that, job loss, and the suicide of my friend, and all these different things. It's like I just, and I guess that's why I went to that. I just wanted to know. I just wanted some kind of understanding, some kind of peace. I just wanted peace. That's all I wanted. I wasn't even trying to, take a picture of Branham and throw it in the trash. Like it was just, I just wanted peace. And I just can't, like, if you're watching this and you're on the fence about God or whatever, like, I'm sure you've earned your right to be critical. And I can't imagine what some people in the message or they've left, the pain and the hurt that they hold themselves. But just remember this: God is your answer what you were taught, what you learned, that was not God. Like, there's just so much more to Jesus Christ than what you've ever even really given thought to. He's not a genie in a bottle that that you name it and claim it and you get exactly what you want, and you don't have to be sick anymore. You can cast off your sickness. That's not what this is about. This is about the Son of the living God and what he did for us. And when we do part 3, I really came to an understanding of what a sinner I had been. And it was when I read the 4 Gospels. And I'm not going to take from any of that, but we're going to cover that in the next one. But just, I'll sum it up by this. Jesus Christ is all you need when Jesus Christ is all you have. And Branham and Jesus Christ don't mix. If you need Branham and Jesus Christ, you don't have only Jesus Christ. That's just all there is to it. And I know a lot of people are going to get mad when they hear that. Pick up your Bible and prove me wrong, and I'll wait.
I don't know that I can say anything to top what you've just said to end it, but I will say that there's some similarities that I had. There's some favorite moments through this to give some encouragement to somebody who's going through the process of deconstruction and or reconstruction. I am of the opinion that the deconstruction is the hardest thing you'll ever go through, but the reconstruction is the most work that you'll go through. And some people, like for me, I wouldn't say that I'm done. I have no problem. I have no problem saying that for the rest of my life, I'm content if it takes that long, because I'm taking it slow. I'm taking it in my own time. I am very, well, you know me, I research everything. I'm very cautious in how I reconstruct myself because I don't want anything like what I had.
Right.
But there were a few favorite moments in that process that I will mention, which, it's very similar to what you had, although it's not exactly the same. But there's this moment that struck me right before leaving. I'm a songwriter, musician, composer, etc. But the song kept coming to me. Jesus didn't come to save the saved. He came to save the lost. And I was feeling this real sick feeling in my stomach going to these services. I don't care which church it was, from coast to coast, in the message, where they're preaching at their own congregation of believers who have accepted Jesus and should have their own, their own confession that they're Christian. I mean, it's not like these are, not like he's going to the halls of prostitution and preaching. He's preaching at these people as though they're all sinners and totally ignoring the rest of the, in many cases they're in small towns. So the whole rest of the town who needs to come to Jesus, totally ignoring them. And it placed a burden on me. That was one of the first milestones. I won't say that led me over the edge, but it it did put it to a place where I had to think about it. And then as I'm going through the deconstruction, as a musician, I had made a quote-unquote covenant with God that I would it was a one-way covenant. I would only play his music if he would bless me with musical skills. Well, he's already blessed me with the skills. And I was telling this, we were going to a Baptist church at that time. I was telling this Baptist church about it, and I felt really burdened because I felt like as an artist, I was told I could only paint with the color green. I could only play this music, and I love all music, classical, jazz, the whole bit. And he said, John, I want to do something for you. He took me to a blues bar. And so here I am with a Baptist minister. You know how the Baptists are with alcohol. I'm having drinks, and at this time, I still don't like alcohol very much. I have drank, but we had this mental image that if you even took a sip, you were going to get fallout drunk off of just a little sip. So here I am with a Baptist minister and in a blues bar. That was a key moment. But as I'm reconstructing, I'm really wrestling because, and I still to this day, I'll fully admit, I still wrestle with this. I don't and never will understand the Christian traditions that other churches have that we didn't have. And they're very commonly accepted. I'll go into a new church and I don't care which church I've tried. They say things as if they preach in such a way that they expect you to have already accepted this thing that I never knew that I was supposed to accept. I won't give examples, but I sat down in private with this minister probably 2-3 years ago, and I was explaining this to him, and the specific example I gave him was in the New Testament in one of Paul's letters, and he said, "John, whenever I preach to my congregations, I usually will preface anything that I say about Paul's letters with this: I want you to understand you're reading someone else's mail." And then it suddenly hit me, if you run it through that perspective, it completely flips everything that you thought as tradition upside down. You're reading somebody else's mail. And I could go on. We'll talk more in the next episode, but I want to talk more to you about how different it is for you as a new minister who's now left the message. How different is that between how you were raised? And I'll be honest, we can't fit that in the rest of this episode.
Yeah,
so
right.
We're going to push it over to the next one. So if you've enjoyed the show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For an overview of the historical research of William Branham and the healing revivals, read Preacher Behind the White Hoods, a critical examination of William Branham and his message, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.